We're based in Montana, but we work across the United States. And at Headwaters Economics, we believe the future of our communities and the future of the landscape are inextricably intertwined, especially in a rapidly changing world. So we work to uncover actionable data, to identify policy insights, and partner with communities to find solutions to some of the most pressing challenges of the 21st century, like living with floods and wildfires, managing new demands on our landscapes from housing pressure and increasing outdoor recreation, and helping communities to diversify their economies. At Headwaters Economics, we're laser focused on creating practical research and tools that decision makers can use to help people and places thrive. And we do that in 3 ways. We partner directly with communities. So with one foot on the ground, collaborating with municipal and county and state governments, nonprofit organizations, and other stakeholders, we really learn firsthand the kinds of questions communities have and the challenges that they're facing. That leads to our economic research. So based on our community partnerships, we really identify policy strategies that can help at the local, state, and federal levels. And we produce and publish our research with our team of geographers, statisticians, economists, and data scientists. And then our community partnerships also help us identify practical data tools that they need to help answer some of the questions they're facing. And that's what I'm here to talk about today. So what I'm hoping to do with our time together is first share just a little bit about how we build our tools, the kinds of considerations that we have, and then give you a live demonstration of one of our tools, Neighborhoods at Risk. We'll save probably 20 or 30 minutes for questions and discussion. And I'm sure there'll be plenty of questions about how a tool like this could be built or developed for Canada. I don't work in Canada. We don't have a lot of insights at Headwaters Economics about the data landscape that you all are facing in Canada. And so I'm hoping this will be more of a dialogue. I'm sure a lot of you will have ideas and answers for each other. And I'm excited to be a part of that conversation today. So before I dig into telling you a little bit more about our tools and how we build them, I'd like to tell you just a story. This is the town of Grand Rapids, Michigan. It's a community of about 200,000 people. And like many communities in North America, they recognized a disparity in where tree canopy is across their community. They noticed that some neighborhoods, especially wealthier neighborhoods, had a lot of tree canopy cover, and some neighborhoods, including their older downtown core, was really lacking tree canopy. And of course, trees are important. They improve walkability and livability. They increase property values. They slow down traffic. And they reduce people's stress levels. So they're really important for the livability of a community. But beyond that, trees are also really important in adapting to climate change. Of course, they filter out air pollution, they absorb rainwater, and they can shade communities from extreme heat events. So Grand Rapids, Michigan had a goal of doubling its tree canopy cover by the year 2025. And they're using our tool, Neighborhoods at Risk, to help prioritize where they should be making these investments in tree canopy. And I'm just going to show you a quick little video of how that works, just so you can get a sense of the flavor of how Neighborhoods at Risk works before I give you a deeper dive in the live demo a bit later. So in our tool, you can search for any community, you pick it from a drop-down menu, and then the tool opens to a page where we've provided some high-level summary statement about the neighborhoods that have climate vulnerability. And we have some filters related to the people, the social and economic conditions in the neighborhoods, as well as climate exposure. These actually work like filters. So as you slide these little bars, the number of neighborhoods will change across the community. And you can change those filters. So here I'm going to change the filters that we're showing so that we can see where Grand Rapids might need to invest in tree canopy. They're really interested in where there are families in poverty and high share of rental housing, because these are neighborhoods where tree canopy investments will make the biggest bang for buck. So then you can also look at neighborhoods where there's a lack of tree canopy. As you hover over neighborhoods with your mouse, you get more data, and you can download information in a customized report. So as you'll see later, when you click this button, our server is actually generating for you a customized report with all kinds of data and information specific to the filters that you've set in the data tool. The report includes data, charts, graphs, and further reading specifically about what you have asked of the tool. And I'll show you this in a lot more detail a little bit later, but I wanted to give you a bit of a flavor of what Neighborhoods at Risk is all about before I tell you more about how we build our tools. So our vision for our data tools is that we are democratizing data. All of our tools are free, easy to use, accessible on the internet, and we really are thinking about them for communities that might not have their own GIS staff, data analysts, and statisticians to go combing through lots of data sources and find these insights. So they're available for all US communities across the entire country, and they all include some customizable data, interactions that help communities surface really important insights so they can prioritize their resources to the people and places that need it most. We use only the most credible data sources, often from federal data sources in the United States, but we go beyond providing just the data to also providing some interpretation to help users understand what it is they're seeing and how it can help them with their decision-making about their economy, their land use, and their climate adaptation strategies. So we've been at this for about 17 years at Headwaters Economics, and we got our start because we partnered with land management agencies in the United States, the Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management. Every 10 years or so, these organizations are required to update their master plans for how they're managing their forests and their landscapes. And they're required to think about how their decisions impact neighboring communities. And what we saw was that their planners didn't have access to great data to help them really understand the impacts on neighboring communities. So we stepped in with some reports, and it started out with a series of really paper reports, a set of binders in our office. We would pull off the shelf and look through the data and then send reports to these land managers that we were partnering with across the country. And that evolved into a series of CD-ROMs. You might remember these contraptions that we would actually put in the mail to land managers across the country with some customized data for them. That evolved into Excel workbooks that we would email. They had all kinds of data and macros behind the scenes generating this information. And that, of course, all led into the web-based, browser-based tools that are free and accessible to everyone today. And now we have a family of data tools. I'm going to focus today on Neighborhoods at Risk, but I want to just tell you a little bit about some of the other tools that we manage. Based on all the work we did with the Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management, we have 3 custom agency tools designed to help them think about their land management strategies. One for the Forest Service, one for the Bureau of Land Management, and one for U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Those were all developed in partnership with the agency economists and planners so that we're providing the most significant and meaningful data for their land use decision-making. In addition to Neighborhoods at Risk, we also have a tool called the Economic Profile System. This is a suite of about 12 different reports that provide insights about jobs, wages, demographics, and land use change specifically related to different industries and sectors. It's available for all US counties and communities, even things like congressional districts and tribal and trust lands. There are reports available in the Economic Profile System. In 2020, we launched Wildfire Risk to Communities in partnership with the U.S. Forest Service. This tool shows maps and data about community wildfire risk, and it provides tools and resources to help communities reduce their risk. And I'm really excited that we're going to be launching a new user interface to that tool in February, and it's going to really mirror what I'm showing you today in Neighborhoods at Risk. We have a library of trail benefits that's a curated collection of over 100 studies that document the economic and social value of trails and outdoor recreation to help communities make the case for those kinds of investments. And then our newest tool is our Rural Capacity Index. We developed this just in February, and it helps identify communities across the country where investments in staffing and resources are needed to help with climate adaptation strategies and to help access competitive federal grant programs in the United States that provide funding for climate adaptation. All of our tools are free, available on our website, so I hope you'll check them out. All of our tools compile data from dozens of sources. And so we go through all of these sources every year, some of them every month, and update and compile and process the data. If you were to go to these sites, you'd have to visit a dozen websites, you'd have to learn the queries to access all of this data. And we do all that work to assemble it for you. It all lives on our server, and it's all updated as soon as new data become available. So we have some considerations about the kinds of data that we include. All of our data is nationwide for the United States. So we are only selecting data sets that are available consistently for all communities. We also make sure all the data we use is consistently updated, so it's not going to get stale. It's going to continually represent the changing conditions across the United States. And we only use the most credible sources. Primarily, these are open source, free federal data sets. We do have some additional data where we have data sharing agreements with other organizations. So I want to share just a little bit about how we build our tools. And it all starts with these community partnerships. With one foot on the ground with municipal governments and other partners in local communities, we really start to understand the kinds of questions they have, the data that they need to answer those questions, and the barriers that they're facing in adapting to climate change in the case of neighborhoods at risk. So that often leads us to develop some kind of prototype or test tool. In the case of neighborhoods at risk, we were partnering with about 20 cities in the Great Lakes region of the United States. They were really interested in better understanding where their climate adaptation work should be focused to reach the people in the community who are most vulnerable. So not just thinking about the physical impacts of climate change, but also the social and economic barriers that can make it hard for communities to adapt. So we started building this tool, and then we gathered a lot of practitioners throughout the region and across the United States to help us refine our prototype. We worked with emergency managers, climate adaptation specialists, climate scientists, and user interface experts to design a tool to be most useful for our audiences. And then our team of coders, developers, and data engineers build the technology to make it all work into the web-based platform you see today. But this isn't a one-directional process. We are continually going back to those practitioners and to our community partners to learn how the tool can be improved, what additional data might need to be included, and to refine the tool so that it's most useful for folks. I wanted to share just a little bit about the kinds of considerations that we weigh in all of our tool development. We always start with the goal and the user. What is it that we want to have happen, and who can make it happen? In the case of neighborhoods at risk, we're really thinking about how we can make climate adaptation strategies more equitable, reaching the people who are most vulnerable, not just the neighborhoods with the loudest voices or with the greatest physical exposure to climate change. And we know the people that can make that happen are often local elected officials and their staff. So that's the user that we had in mind for this particular tool that I'm sharing with you today. A lot of the communities that use our tool don't have their own GIS specialists. They don't have their own statisticians or data scientists. And so we need the tool to be really accessible and user-friendly for those audiences. We also have to weigh the trade-offs between scale and accuracy. A lot of our data tools are at the county level, which in the United States can be very coarse, especially in the western part of the country. Neighborhoods at risk, we wanted to be down to as fine a granular detail as possible. But when you get down to that level of granularity, you often lose some accuracy. And so there's a trade-off to weigh there. With neighborhoods at risk, we ended up using the scale of census tract, which is an area where the population is equal to about 4,000 residents. So in rural areas, the footprint of a census tract is very large, but in urban areas, the footprint of a census tract can be very small. The census tract has a relative accuracy overall across the whole country with the data that we're using that's pretty good. So we felt like that was the right trade-off for this tool. Most of the data you'll see in neighborhoods at risk about social vulnerability comes from the US Census Bureau's American Community Survey. Because it's a survey, there's always a margin of error. And so the finer scale you get to, the greater the margin of error. And the fewer responses to the survey, such as in rural areas, the greater the margin of error. And we try to really demonstrate where there's error and where there's uncertainty in the data that we provide. And I'll show you that in the tool. And then a final consideration for us is maintenance. We have to ensure that whatever data we include, we can maintain over time, that it will be continually updated, and that it's something we feel we can manage on our team. So I'm excited to dig in now to our Neighborhoods at Risk tool, which we really created to help communities see where climate change will have the greatest impacts. Not only where exposure to the physical consequences of climate change, like flooding and heat, are going to be the greatest, but also where climate change will have disproportionate impacts on people. For example, people with limited mobility, like the disabled and senior citizens, might not be able to evacuate in the event of a climate emergency. People who experience cultural and institutional barriers and systemic racism may not have access to aid and resources and might not trust the institutions offering aid and resources. And families who live in poverty or who live in rental housing might not have the agency and the funding to mitigate their housing against the impacts of flooding or heat in advance of a climate emergency. So we really wanted to reveal where these things intersect. Where are the physical hazards of climate change intersecting social vulnerabilities? We also provide data about climate projections into the future. So while the data in the map is kind of a snapshot, we're also providing some information about what the climate trends are expected to be so that folks can plan for a longer time horizon. And so with that, I'm going to jump right into a live demonstration of Neighborhoods at Risk. The link is also in the chat, so you can play along if you'd like to. Sometimes that's distracting. Sometimes folks like to do that. So when you first get to the opening screen, you can search for any community, county, or state. I'm excited to share that in 2023, we're also going to be adding tribal and trust lands to our tool. And I'd like to start today searching for Montana, which is where I'm calling from. And you might have read that this summer, Montana had some of the most significant flooding we've had in a generation. Yellowstone National Park was shut down for several weeks. There were floods in the northwestern part of the state as well, and hundreds of people were displaced because of this flooding. So when you first open the tool, you get some immediate insights. And because I'm screen sharing, the tool is a little bit slower. Hopefully it's faster for you where you're calling from today. At the top of the page, you right away get a summary statement telling you how many census tracts meet the criteria that you've set in the filters. And the filters are over here at the left. There are 3 filters for people that are shown automatically and 4 filters for climate exposure. The people filters are automatically set to the median for the community that you searched. So all these neighborhoods, these census tracts shown in blue, are greater than the state median for the number of people over age 65, the number of housing units that are rentals, and the number of people with disabilities. These 3 filters that show up automatically are actually intelligently selected by the tool. When you search for community, we rank your community against all others in the country, and the 3 that rank the highest for your community are the ones that are automatically shown. So right away, you're getting insights that your community has, in this case, the state of Montana, has a high share of people over age 65, mobile homes, and people with disabilities compared to the rest of the country. But there are other characteristics you can add. If you click the See More button, you can add characteristics. There are 10 currently available in neighborhoods at risk. I'm going to click on housing units that are rentals, and you'll see that it gets added to our list of filters over here on the left, and it's automatically set to the state median. So I know that there are a lot of climate adaptation professionals in the state of Montana working right now to think about mitigating flood impacts specifically to folks who live in mobile homes. Mobile homes are more likely to be damaged in a flood event, and mobile home residents have a harder time recovering because they often can't access federal aid money in the United States because they often don't own the land underneath their mobile homes. So Montana climate folks are thinking about adaptation strategies like buying out mobile home parks and developing cooperative ownership structures so that mobile home residents will be able to access some of this aid. So if I'm a person working on this in the state of Montana, I might turn off the filter for people over 65 and turn off the filter for people with disabilities. And now I'm looking at areas that have greater than the state median mobile homes and greater than the state median housing units that are rentals. Now I want to identify those places that also have high flood risk. And I'm going to just slide this filter. You'll see the census tracts here shift. So here are some of the most vulnerable places in the state of Montana if I'm interested in thinking about rental and mobile home housing in areas with flood risk. When you hover over a census tract, you get information about that specific place. In a table, it's telling us there's 2,000 people that live in Sanders County, Montana. I can click on a census tract, and then that enables me to download a report specifically for that place. There's also a table over here on the right that shows us the combined results for all of the census tracts shown in blue. So this is summing up the number of people and the share of people that meet the criteria we've selected in our filters. From here, you can download a report, and I'm going to show you that just really briefly. When you click on the report, you get this dialog box. You'll see that you can download the report as a PDF or an Excel document. We do that really intentionally. The PDF is useful if you want to email it around, print it out, and show it to your elected officials. But the Excel document can also be useful if you want to use the charts and graphs and data in your own analyses or put them into your own slide decks or reports. We've also made available shapefiles for the areas that you have searched. So the community that you typed in the box, you can get a shapefile with all the data. That's really useful for GIS folks. But of course, we know not all of our users have that kind of capacity. So I'm going to download the report in Excel. When you click that button, it pings our server and it's generating a customized report based specifically on the criteria you selected in the report. And then it downloads it right to your computer. And in my computer, it's going to just go ahead and open it right up. And I'll show you what's in this report. There's a title page with a map page showing you the census tracts that I've selected. And then there's a table of contents that's hyperlinked, so you can see the kinds of data that are included in the report. Each page has data sort of spread out across a 2-page spread. On the left side are data and charts and graphs about that metric. And on the right side, we have what we call our study guide. We describe what's being measured. We're really defining the variables on that page. And then there's a little bit of context about why that variable is important, why you might want to be thinking about it in your climate adaptation strategies. So I'm going to jump to this page about people of color and Hispanics. And I want to show you that we provide in the data side, not only the number, the count of people, but also the percent of people. So, for example, in the state of Montana, about 6.2% of people are American Indian. But in the census tracts, the combined tracts that I selected, 28.7% of the people who live there are Native American. So in places with a high share of mobile homes, a high share of rental housing, and a lot of flood risk, almost 30% of the people are Native American. That's compared to 8.8% of the United States population in total. So we are not only providing data about the places that you filtered, but the entire community you selected and the entire United States to serve as a benchmark for comparison. We also provide literature cited at the very end of the report, so you can read more and dig into some of the science behind the data that we share in the report. So I'm going to go back to neighborhoods at risk, and I'm going to search now a different place. I'm going to search King County, Washington. So Montana, of course, is a large rural state, but let's look at a more urbanized area. King County, Washington is home to Seattle. And so you'll see that the census tracts in this area are a lot smaller because there's a more dense population here. And right away, you'll also notice that the filters that automatically show up for King County are very different than the filters that automatically showed up for Montana. So in King County, housing units that are rentals, households with no car, and people who don't speak English well are the top ranking variables for that county. In Seattle, you might be interested, say emergency managers are interested in understanding where there's a high share of people who don't speak English well and where there's a high amount of flood risk. These are places where emergency managers might need to be customizing their outreach materials, delivering programs in partnership with community centers, religious organizations, and cultural institutions to reach the folks who have language barriers. And these are places where recovery and aid organizations might need to really focus their efforts after a climate emergency. I also want to share with you a little bit about our climate projections data here at the top of the page. So this is a second tab in the Neighborhoods at Risk tool. And you can see again right away, we provide a statement about summarizing the outcomes of this page. You're going to see a 180% increase in heat and a 9% increase in heavy precipitation in King County, Washington. These charts below give you a little bit more detail about that. And you can change the heat scenario that you're interested in seeing, and you can change the precipitation scenario. Let's say you're interested in really extreme events, greater than 4 inches of precipitation. You can also change the time horizon. We have a default of 25 years, but maybe you're interested in a longer time frame in thinking about how climate will likely change in your community over time. And if you're really optimistic, you can look at a lower emissions scenario and see how that might change. So these data are useful for community leaders that really want to be thinking about not just what the conditions are today, but what they might look like into the future for long-range planning. The last thing I'll share here in this live demonstration is just this little menu up here at the top. There's an About page that provides more resources and some FAQs about the data that we use in Neighborhoods at Risk. So if you have questions or want to dig deeper, there's a lot of information on that page. There's also a video about how to use the tool. So if you have questions after today, that can be a really nice starting point. And finally, there's a Contact Us page, and I hope you'll visit this page. We really are interested in your feedback, your ideas and suggestions. You can reach out to me directly. My phone and email are right there on the site. You can send us a message down here, and you can subscribe to our newsletters. We only send about 6 a year, and you'll see our latest data updates and research products right away if you subscribe there. So I really want to thank you all for your attention, for your interest in this tool, and I'm really looking forward to our dialogue and conversation next. I'm happy to answer questions if I can.
Thank you, Kelly, for a very insightful presentation. I think starting with the impetus of why this tool was created is so important, and it really will benefit those smaller communities who really don't have the capacity to maybe access these types of data. So thank you once again. I'm going to welcome questions or comments from audience members if they'd like to unmute themselves or even pose them in the chat, just so that we can have a free and open dialogue. We have some great comments coming into the chat. Thank you. Maybe while we're holding on for some questions, maybe I can pose the first question. So really, it's just I wanted to understand, like, what was the uptake? So now that you have this, tool available, what's the general uptake from communities? What's the reception? And you could maybe comment on larger versus smaller communities and how they have benefited from the use of this tool.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. We have some really, we've had quite a lot of great uptake. So we're now seeing about 30,000 reports generated on this tool a year, and communities large and small. So the example I shared at the very beginning with Grand Rapids, Michigan is a real world example. They're using the tool to identify neighborhoods where they should prioritize their investments in tree planting. But urban areas are using the tool as well to think about things like, as I was just describing, thinking about things like outreach strategies for emergency management, preparing for climate emergencies. We're seeing a lot of folks that, because we developed the tool in partnership with some Great Lakes communities originally, those communities have been using it for quite a while, and we're seeing a lot of interest in both urban and more rural communities, and some really creative uses. So one example is Dearborn, Michigan. They were really interested in not only thinking about climate adaptation, but also some health impacts in their community.
Right.
So they're using neighborhoods at risk to identify where they could develop some investments in walking trails, where they can be thinking about outreach strategies and programs, actual programs to get folks outside and exercising, and how to do that in a way that's going to reach the most people with the most significant health outcomes, potential health outcomes from that kind of exercise. Lots of great examples across the country, and because we're planning to add tribal areas and some wildfire data, I think we'll continue to see new and interesting applications of the tool.
Absolutely. Thank you. I think we do have a couple of comments. Maybe I'll just moderate through them in the chat. So this is from Katya. She says, thank you, Kelly. I'd love to hear some examples of how communities have used this in decision-making. What's the impact been? I think you kind of alluded to one of them, but if you've had any other examples that you could maybe perhaps highlight.
Yeah, I think another potential example is we're seeing several communities that are working on climate action plans, sort of the master plan of all the things they should do, using this tool to really narrow down the list of action items. So taking a list of things that might include things like tree planting, strategies for cool air facilities during heat events, and identifying neighborhoods in which those things should be placed. So refining their action plans to be more site specific and not just general, like we need a clean air facility or a cooling center, but here's the neighborhood where it belongs in order to help the most people.
Right. Perfect. I'm just going to quickly go through these. So will this tool be translated to other languages to help make this data and tool more accessible? So other than English, does this pertain to, would this identify or help other communities as well?
Yeah, such a great question. We are working on that. And on several of our tools, actually working on other languages right now.
Right. Okay. What process was used to determine key equity indicators?
Yeah, this really goes back to our partnerships with communities. And with practitioners. So we started out by understanding from our community practitioners, in the case of neighborhoods at risk, working with these cities around the Great Lakes, to understand the kinds of equity challenges they were facing. But working with practitioners, data scientists, climate adaptation professionals, and working through the literature with our own economists, really tried to take a holistic look at the different variables and indicators that are maybe most impactful. And there are trade-offs to weigh. Of course, we didn't put every possible indicator into the tool because then we're overwhelming users. And so we have to have some that are priority that we think are going to be representative of some larger questions that communities are facing. So a lot of that work identifying the key indicators and ranking and prioritizing these indicators is done in partnership with experts, subject matter experts, and also community members that are wrestling with questions. We started out, I think, with 5 indicators of social vulnerability in the tool, and now it's at 10. And I think we wouldn't add any more, but we might change or modify some as we go.
Right, perfect. I hope that answers your question. We do have Dr. Brent Doberstein on the line. Perhaps, Brent, if you'd like to pose your question directly.
Yeah, for sure. So I note that the climate projections are fairly general at this point and give a sense of increasing precipitation over X years. Is there any plan to tie that to census tract level projections? I know that's very difficult to do. My interest is, of course, in managed retreat and more, I think more importantly, proactive managed retreat. So if we can identify areas that are expected to become more flood prone, then that'll buy us 10 to 20 to 30 years to engage in managed retreat.
Yeah, such an important question. And we do not have plans to do that ourselves. So, the data that we're using, the climate projection data we're using is from Cornell Laboratory and all the climate data that we're using are from a variety of sources based on subject matter expert, climate expert, and modeling. And if those data were available, if climate projections were available at the census tract scale or something at that relative scale, we would absolutely include it. But getting to that degree of granularity for projections is, as you know, really challenging.
Really challenging.
We have this criteria that the data mostly be available consistently for the entire United States. So while there are some regions of the country that might have more granular projection data that we could include, it is not available for the whole nation. And so that's one of our considerations about data maintenance and building these tools. In our limited capacity, we're not able to incorporate a whole lot of smaller data sets that are more locally calibrated.
Right. At the very least, it could be used to identify areas of concern now that are expected to, well, at least we need to study the future and see if they're going to get worse in the future. So yeah, it's a first level cut, I think. That's really useful. No, thanks.
Thank you.
Perfect. Coming back to this idea of data maintenance, what is the frequency with which data is updated, and what does the process of updating the site look like for you and the team?
Yeah. Well, we're a small organization. There's 12 of us that work at Headwaters Economics. We have some consultants that help us out from time to time, but basically our team of data engineers every year update the social vulnerability data in neighborhoods at risk. It's based on the US Census Bureau's American Community Survey, and it's released once a year. It's actually coming out tomorrow. Very exciting day for us at Headwaters Economics. And our team takes that data and processes it, gets it into our server, and then links the necessary variables into an API that our tools access. So for the social vulnerability data, the people filters in neighborhoods at risk, those are updated every year. The climate variables, the climate exposure variables, each of those have sort of different timelines for when they're updated, but we're also updating those regularly. So the tool is updated at least once a year, if not more frequently.
Perfect. I have another question incoming. Are you going to adjust your model based on how likelihood, on how low likelihood events actually occur?
Yeah, it's such a good question. So, the data that we're using on the climate modeling, on the climate exposure side, again, is not our models. These are models that we're using, we're graciously borrowing from other folks, including First Street Foundation, the FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency in the United States, and the National Land Cover data set that's produced by the United States Geologic Survey. And so as those models are updated, we're getting the fresh data and incorporating it into the tool. To varying degrees, those models are incorporating low probability events and the rapid pace of change that we're seeing in especially flood events across the country. So we have recently added the First Street Foundation data set, which is the properties with flood risk filter.
Right.
And that incorporates, it's sort of a broader net than what the FEMA 500-year floodplain data incorporate. So you can read more about the different data sets in our about page under the FAQs, and I'd be happy to chat with anybody if they've got questions about what those data sets are including. But again, we're not doing the climate modeling ourselves. We're just taking all of the data and packaging it into something for communities to use.
Perfect. And I think I have one more question, and this would lead to some of the changes that you're hoping to propose in 2023. With your projection of covering Indigenous and traditional territories in this tool in the future, how will you folks adapt your equity indicators to integrate and consider traditional knowledge?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I'm not sure I have a great answer right now. We are working closely right now with folks on a different tool called the Wildfire Risk to Communities tool, which you can find at wildfirerisk.org. And so we built that tool in partnership with the U.S. Forest Service, and we've just recently added tribal areas to that tool. And essentially we added geographic boundaries so that you can search tribal and trust lands in the tool. That is a very first cut, and we're working on thinking about what a second iteration might be for the tool to incorporate Indigenous knowledge and to incorporate not only the physical exposures, but some of the cultural exposures to risk in tribal and trust lands for wildfire. So we're going to learn a lot in that process and hopefully be able to translate some of that over to neighborhoods at risk.
Perfect. This is a question based on the census data that's used for the tool. So are you showing both how communities compare with one another on a national scale and how variables differ within a municipal or county boundary? So does that mean analyzing data within a municipal boundary or to see the variability within the local community?
Yeah, I think that I think I understand this question, and maybe I actually think I failed to show you all something in the tool. So let me share my screen again and just give you a quick example. So I'm pulling up Montana again, so that I can, I think, kind of explain this. So what we're showing here, you can see all of the above, I think, is the answer to this question. Are we looking at within a community or across a community? And so you can look at an individual census tract by hovering over it and get the data for that census tract. You can look at this table over here and get the combined results for all of those census tracts or neighborhoods shown in blue. And then if you download the report, you get the data for all of Montana and the census tracts shown in blue. So there's a yes and thing here. I think you can look across the entire place that you've searched or just those that you have filtered. The other thing I wanted to mention that I failed to is that we report margins of error in these little green, these little gray text here. So you can see how significant the error is for the place you've searched. This can be really big in rural places with smaller populations. And so we really want to highlight the fact that there are some potential inaccuracies or variability in the data's precision because it's based on a census survey. So I think I failed to mention that in the demo, and I just wanted to show that. And I'm not sure if I'm answering the question that was posed. So please feel free to jump in if I'm not.
This is Charmeline here. Hi, I'm from University of Waterloo. We've been working with census data for a social vulnerability index. And so one of the challenges for us is we have census data. We can do a social vulnerability analysis at the national scale, but then for communities, we have to reanalyze the data so that we're not comparing one city to another, but instead one neighborhood to another. And so that's what I was wondering if it's clear in the different filters what level of analysis I'm looking at. Because if it's just reporting the census data, so I can see that, is that a percentage, that percentage is out of the population in this boundary? That's the kind of thing that I'm wondering about.
Yeah, that is a really good question. Yeah, so we're not comparing across all communities in the United States. This is what you're looking at is for this place specifically. So if we search a community, let's go to Seattle, for example. The filters are automatically set to be the median for the place that you've searched. So all those places shown in blue are above the state median for households with no car and housing units that are rentals and people of color and Hispanics. This is just within the boundary of Seattle. So if I were to search the state of Washington or King County, the median would be different. But this is just looking at the place that you've searched. And then we've got the total for those census tracts that are shown in blue here. So we're not comparing Seattle to every place in the country. We're looking at just within Seattle's boundaries, what are the vulnerabilities there? And that's really intentional because our audience is, for example, the municipal government of Seattle or whatever community is searching. Does that answer your question?
Yes, that's absolutely perfect. And then if you wanted to take, let's say, a regional or a watershed approach or something like that, potentially you could then change the boundary for that particular area.
Yes, right now we have only cities, counties, and states. So you could do a county level approach. We're not able right now to do multiple counties, but the data are available for download. So for folks with GIS capacity, they can do their own analysis.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Perfect. So I am cognizant of time, so perhaps we'll take our last question and then wrap it up for today's webinar. So this is from Dr. Stephanie Chang. Thank you, Kelly. I was wondering whether there are plans to include information on what communities are doing to address their risk. Are communities seeking information on what other communities are doing to reduce risk? So is there some sort of information sharing going on?
Yeah, that's a great question also. We're not doing that ourselves with Neighborhoods at Risk, but one of our partners in the development of the tool is NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And they have a climate solutions toolkit where they actually feature neighborhoods at risk, and they are collecting case studies and examples from across the United States to showcase how communities are adapting and thinking about climate adaptation. So that's a great resource that is trying to get at, I think what your question is, Dr. Chang.
Perfect, thank you. And with that, we'll wrap up the webinar for today. I do want to mention that if there are any specific questions that you'd like to pose to Kelly in the future, perhaps Kelly, you could drop your email in the chat, and I'm sure she'd love to follow up with you. I want to thank Kelly once again for your very insightful presentation. I think you provide a lot of takeaways for people on the call to go back to their own work and perhaps implement, and it gives us some questions to pose about how we can potentially implement this within the Canadian landscape. So once again, I want to thank the presenter, and I want to thank all the participants who were able to join us today. Once again, we will be sending out the recording if you would like to watch it again or share it amongst your colleagues within the next week or so. It'll be on both of our websites, www.uwaterloo.ca/CCRF. Yep, perfect. Cindy has all the URLs in the chat. So once again, I'd like to conclude our session. And thank you, Kelly, and thank you to all the presenters. And I'll give you back 3 minutes of your time.